Welcome to the Savannah Sideways podcast, the strange story of Savannah's ancient Roman statuary. I am your host, Jessica Leigh Lebos. Episode 5, Meet the Statues. After fire ravaged the Greenwich mansion and its winter inhabitants decamped down the coast, the property was basically abandoned, the scorched ruins left to the looters, squirrels, and spider lilies. We can only imagine the gothic creepiness that set in over the next decade, the grass growing up between the forsaken statues, the busts of fallen emperors on their backs, mouths gaping to the sky. This would have been the state the property was found in when the city of Savannah purchased it for $75,000 in 1933 or 1937. The city's website cites both years, and in other resources, it's about half and half. Either way, during these years, Savannah, like the rest of America, was still reeling from the Great Depression. Port business was down, and boll weevils had all but tamed the cotton industry. Unemployment, poverty, and homelessness plagued the once thriving working class of the first part of the 20th century. Those conditions were even more compounded for the city's black citizenry under the oppression of Jim Crow laws, and many sought better lives by heading north or west as part of the Great Migration. But the city's economic climate wasn't all dire, especially if you were an industrialist or worked for one. In 1935, the Union Bag Company opened on the site of the old Hermitage Plantation. Here, enslaved people had produced millions of handmade Savannah gray bricks, which are highly coveted today. Union Bag, later known as Union Camp, and then International Paper, drove East Coast commerce by milling longleaf pines left by the turpentine industry into brown paper bags, thanks to the technology developed by Charles Hurdy. That technology also indirectly transformed the Savannah sugar refinery down the river, which had the novel idea to market its Dixie Crystals brand in 5-pound paper bags. Both of these facilities provided thousands and thousands of local jobs over the years. After the horrific sugar dust explosion that killed 14 workers in 2008, Dixie Crystals still operates today as part of the U.S. sugar conglomerate. International Paper announced its very sudden closure in August of 2025. Civically, the progressive era that touted beautiful public spaces had given way to a different kind of progress, defined by tearing down the old for the new. This resulted in the destruction of 3 of Oglethorpe's 24 original squares and the demolition of countless architectural treasures during this time. Savannah was a city trying to regain its footing, and the pile of rubble cluttering the new cemetery expansion had no place in this modern era. 12 statues were documented as part of the sale, and there's no way to know what other relics may have been picked up by anyone able to haul them off. Significantly, a pair of Egyptian-style marble sphinxes shown in the silent films did not make it into the city's storage, and there are murmurs among old-timers that some of the marble columns from the house were dumped into the Wilmington River. The marble bounty languished in wooden crates under the dominion of the city's Park and Tree Department until 1965, when the statues were transferred to the guardianship of the Telfair Museum. 7 of them were taken out to display. There's the 2 double-faced Janus Herms, one male and one female, that once stood in the garden and are visible in the black and white photo I now own. These marble pillars were carved in Rome somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd centuries. There's a pair of life-sized river gods, also marble. These are French and thought to have been crafted by Renaissance artisans in the 1600s. The 3rd century bust of Marcus Aurelius, also known as Caracalla, depicts the emperor with his signature sneer and beard. There's a very similar sculpture of him in the Louvre in Paris. Caracalla is remembered as, quote, the most notorious and unpleasant of Roman tyrants, and was murdered by one of his own soldiers in the year 217. Also rotating through the museum exhibits is a bust of Roman Emperor Trajan, who reigned from the year 98 to 117, and is regarded as one of Rome's 5 good emperors, who knew they had clickbait listicles in the 2nd century. There's also another marble head from the 2nd or 3rd century of an unidentified but clearly important man, judging from his fancy military epaulets. The rest of the pieces, including the ram's heads, pedestals, and the sarcophagus, were in pretty bad shape and put into storage. Until the late 1980s, when the museum called the city and said, "Y'all need to come get your junk." Well, it was a lot more polite than that. This is Savannah. In a letter dated September 7th, 1988, then Telfair director Gregory Algier Smith wrote, "We appreciate the city's willingness to remove the dozen or so pieces which have been in the museum's storage area for quite some time. As I indicated in our telephone conversation, storage space for works of art is at a premium for us." The letter goes on to recognize the continued loan of the 7 marbles on public display, adding, "When the city is ready to implement a plan to display all of the statues, we will be prepared to turn the 7 back over to you." That sounds like there had at least been some discussion about keeping the collection whole. In the meantime, the lesser specimens were crated up and hauled back to one of the cemetery storage containers and basically forgotten about for the next 30 years. The better 7 have continued to be incorporated and interpreted in various exhibits at the Telfair, most recently as part of an installation focused on the history of Bonaventure Cemetery. This is where you can see the real Bird Girl statue created in 1936 by Chicago artist Sylvia Shaw Judson. Before Midnight, Bonaventure and the Bird Girl also features some of the Greenwich statues, but they have been quietly telling their story in plain sight long before that. Harry DeLorme is a Savannah native and is the director of education and a senior curator at the Telfair, and has been with the museum going on 37 years.
So I've been here continuously since 1989.
These guys were here when I got here. Yeah, they've been here since the 1960s. I remember seeing them as a kid.
Harry has arguably spent more time contemplating the Greenwich statues than anybody, maybe even longer than the people who sculpted them.
I used to be down near the sculpture gallery for many years, but I'd always been fascinated with them, and been more fascinated by it when I found out more about Greenwich and started to see the photographs of them, in the gardens there.
Ah, yes, the photographs. Very compelling. The Telfair still has several prints in its curatorial files, and there's one in the current exhibition of the gardens and the mansion. It's similar to the one now hanging over my desk, thanks in no small part to Harry, but from a different perspective.
I included this one because it showed the Janus heads. The sarcophagus, you can see the fountain back there. There are also these ram's head supports,
right,
which used to be here on loan. I remember seeing those. In fact, I remember them being behind, they had these carpeted walls that were installed in the sculpture gallery back in the 70s. And I remember seeing them behind the walls, so some of them were kind of stashed away back there.
Harry took the time to take me through the Telfair on a Tuesday when the museum is closed. It is housed in yet another stupendous Savannah mansion, this one built in the neoclassical style by British architect William Jay in 1820. Art patron Mary Telfair bequeathed the family home for the education and enjoyment of her community in 1886. The Telfair is the oldest public art museum in the South and is part of an academy complex that includes the ultra-modern Jepson Center for the Arts and the period-perfect Owens Thomas House. The museum's collections and aesthetic mostly focused on colonial American and European art, though Harry and the rest of the curatorial staff have expanded the narrative to include pieces from Gullah Geechee basket weavers and African-American woodworkers. The museum also hosts the largest public collection of visual art by 20th century poet Khalil Gibran. Back when the Greenwich statues arrived, however, the Telfair was still deep in its classical era. After pointing out the reproductions of the Elgin marbles in the mansion's grand hallways, Harry led me down the stairs into an enormous room with soaring ceilings and dappled in natural light. This was originally called the cast room and was once filled with over 70 plaster casts of Greek and Roman sculptures, famous pieces that were used to teach painting, a practice brought over from the art academies of Europe.
But the cast collections were part of the training artists, so they were part of this museum from the get-go, because they were, at the time, they were thought to be kind of like, pinnacle of artistic achievement, the classical sculptures and the artists who created those. And so art students were learned to draw the figure by drawing from casts, in addition to drawing from the human figures. So the first director traveled Europe and commissioned casts of a lot of famous sculptures.
One of those famous sculptures was the Toro Farnese, depicting a scene from Greek mythology involving a wild bull and a lot of drama. It is the largest single piece of Roman antiquity ever found. The original is 12 feet tall, and the cast of the same dimensions once stood in this room.
Massive sculpture, almost all the way to the ceiling. The first director had to assemble it himself. There's pictures of him on a scaffold putting it together. But that's the one that was later sledgehammered because they couldn't get it out of here any other way.
As Harry mentioned, these white marble statues have long dominated as the Platonic ideal of sculptural art, at least for Western civilization. So much so that they were reproduced in white plaster to promote this school of art and thought for generations and across the continents. It clearly influenced 19th century sculptors like Hiram Powers, whose 1842 alabaster statue of Eve being tempted by the serpent is visible in old photographs and film footage of Spencer Schotter's art collection before the fire. Harry says that piece at one point might have escaped its scorched fate if it had better timing.
I think he had the sculpture on loan to Telford because there's a photograph of it in the entrance hall downstairs.
Oh, wow. And then it was returned and then burned down?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Well, that's tragic. As senior curator for the Telfair and the Jepson Center, Harry has helped broaden the way Savannah views art and art history. He's centered artists who were marginalized in their lifetimes, but no less influential, like Myrtle Jones, a self-taught impressionist whose paintings of Savannah streetscapes fetched thousands of dollars at auction, as well as Vernon Edwards, an acolyte of famed woodworker Ulysses Davis, who carved intricate walking sticks that are now coveted by collectors. Harry recently oversaw the new interactive children's museum based on the life of maritime artist William O. Golding, who was kidnapped off the wharf as a child and spent decades at sea before returning to Savannah to illustrate his experiences in vivid color.
Man, it's an incredible story. It really needs more attention, and I don't know, that one should be a movie one day.
Harry is also an artist in a medium like the classical statues of antiquity might live on for eons. But his main material isn't marble, it's plastic. Often on the weekends, he and his wife Rachel, also an artist, collect from local beaches and marshes to layer over original paintings into bright, beautiful landscapes composed of bottle caps and straws and all sorts of discarded items from our disposable era.
I started
Really noticing what was around me and seeing pieces of plastic just, in the marsh grass and, everywhere, and sometimes big deposits of it, it's like, so I started carrying home backpacks of plastic, and I've got enough to last me a long time, but I'm still using them.
His work certainly speaks to global consumption driven by capitalism and the sustainability of coastal Georgia's unique and valuable ecosystems. It also twists the notion of what counts as art in a world glutted with stuff, where content might be becoming the dominant creative form. It also got me thinking more deeply about the Greenwich statues in the context of what we throw away and what is built to last, and how sometimes the most important factor in determining something's worth is the story we tell about it. But listen, before I get too far out into the marsh weeds, let's take a break. The Savannah Sideways podcast is brought to you by... Is it time for your annual eye exam? Dr. Erica Morrow and the staff at Foresight Unique Eyewear and Eye Care in historic downtown Savannah provide a high-level professional experience that is clearly above the rest. Dr. Morrow provides eye care personalized to your needs. Plus, you'll find the coolest, highest quality selection of frames in town. It's all about the optics. Schedule your appointment today at foresigheye.net. When people ask me about the best seafood in Savannah, there's no hesitation. I send them to Bubba Gumbo's on Tybee Island. This is a family-run, water-to-table situation where you can be sure that whatever you're served, perfectly grilled, blackened, or fried, was swimming in the sea this morning, and the guy who reeled it in is probably sitting at the bar. If you'd rather cook at home, BG Seafood Co-op next door can hook you up with the same fresh fruits de mer that they're preparing in the kitchen, and they'll even fillet it all for you and pack it on ice. And should you need a safe harbor to keep your boat, the Tybee Marina, where it all goes down, is happy to oblige you with a slip. Remember, my good people, friends don't let friends eat imported shrimp. Next time you're hankering for local seafood, Head to Bubba Gumbo's and BG Seafood at the Tybee Marina on Lazaretto Creek. Around here, we already know that truth is stranger than fiction, and a lot more interesting, too. If you love cemeteries and you want to delve deep into Savannah's most famous one, you need to meet Don Touton, better known as Bonaventure Don. He offers true stories galore as you stroll through the gravestones. No ghosts, no nonsense, but you might see a wild fox. Whether you're a local or just making a pilgrimage to Savannah's iconic hallowed grounds, Bonaventure Don will give you an experience to last a lifetime, and perhaps beyond. Book a tour now at bonaventuredon.com. Okay, back to the statues. The 2012 appraisal, conducted by Deborah Freer of the Atlanta-based firm Aaron Appraisal Services, counts 19 pieces in the whole collection. That's the 7 at the Telfair and the 5 discussed in the 1988 letter. And then 7 more, including the 2 Corinthian column tops, 4 small marble columns, and an extra bust of an anonymous Roman youth that got in there somewhere. The city had declared the 12 not in the museum as surplus, meaning they could go out for bid with council approval.
The thought was that because they were ancient Roman statuary, that they were highly monetarily valuable, and that if they were auctioned off, they could bring in a lot of money for the city.
That is Luciana Spracher, the director of the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives. Luciana has been researching and curating the city's records for over 20 years. She not only knows what exists deep in the annals of time, but how it relates to Savannah's ongoing story. Luciana oversees public programs like the popular Hungry for History series and has helped compile exhibits about city-owned slaves and the civil rights legacy of W.W. Law. Lately, she's been working on the renaissance of City Hall itself, which has been undergoing its first comprehensive restoration since it was built in 1906. Dozens of city council members and city managers have come and gone, but Luciana has been a steady presence in Savannah, preserving its recorded history with passion and purpose. It is not hyperbole to say that my research would not be possible without the information and documentation she and her staff have made not just available, but accessible. Although she will tell you that she's just simply doing her job. Luciana was instrumental in helping provide primary source information for the appraisal. She says the goal at that point wasn't to necessarily sell the statues, but to insure them. The copy of the statuary appraisal that I obtained from the city shortly after the 2020 vote has most of the individual dollar amounts of the statues redacted. However, it assesses the total replacement cost of the collection at $395,000. Considering the city just spent $165 million on a new arena in 2022, and its current proposed budget is well over $600 million, that actually doesn't seem like a whole lot of money.
That was for insurance values, so we could make sure that we had them properly insured. It is very hard to insure one-of-a-kind items that are irreplaceable. It's hard to appraise things to say, oh, if something happens, we're going to go out and get the exact same thing. Well, you can. If it's destroyed, it's destroyed. Right. So, I mean, it's basically kind of to give us a little bit of buffer if something happens, or if something gets damaged, that we can go and actually do some additional conservation work if, a disaster happens. So that's really what that insurance appraisal was for. But they're irreplaceable items for us, as all our artifacts are, because you can't replace history.
While she and other city staff, including our friend Sam the Graveyard Man, hoped the appraisal would spur movement towards preservation and interpretation of the statues, the 2020 city council members showed otherwise, voting to go ahead with a request for proposal to hire an antiquities dealer. But not everyone saw the financial assessment of the statues as an accurate representation of their true worth.
The value of the collection monetarily really isn't there, because when you look at the appraisals, the individual items are really not that valuable. A lot of them are damaged. There isn't a collection like this that we can tell in the Southeast. There certainly isn't a collection in Savannah like this. So, and it also tells a story about Savannah. So it's looking at its historical and intrinsic value to our community, and then also it's representing a type of collecting and collection in the Southeast that isn't represented. So it's kind of the value is keeping it intact.
The argument that all 19 pieces together as a collection has more worth than the individual statues themselves has also been made by Dr. Mark Abbey, a professor of Greek and Roman antiquity at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. Dr. Abbey had visited Savannah in 2018 and seen the statues at the Telfair. He'd expressed interest to Harry DeLorme in studying them further and even secured a grant from UGA's Wilson Center for Humanities and Arts to begin research in March of 2020. Obviously, those plans got delayed. I'd heard his name bandied about when I first started asking questions about the statues, though none of the council members seemed to be aware of his impending research project. So I sent him an email asking him if he was aware that the city of Savannah had recently voted to sell off part of Spencer Schotter's collection. The answer was a resounding no. He wrote back with much consternation that he thought it was an extremely premature decision given that the statues had never really been properly examined or authenticated, or in the case of the surplus items, even seen the light of day in 30 years.
They're amazing, and it is so surprising to me that they've never been studied. I mean, all the objects that are in storage, of course, would never be known about. There is no reference to these sculptures anywhere in the classical archaeological sculpture.
As an expert on classical antiquities, it was highly unusual that Dr. Abbey had never heard of Spencer Schotter and his statuary collection, since most classical sculpture groupings of this magnitude that were acquired at the time were inventoried in the last century. There were very few Americans with the wealth and willingness to take a grand tour of Europe at that time, and even fewer from the Southeast. Dr. Abbey agreed that the statues told a story that intersected a dizzying amount of historical and cultural points that extend far beyond Savannah.
I just think that they're like this fascinating collection that really merits wider awareness. And it's got all these overlapping strands between like the history of garden design, the history of antiquities, the history of sculptural display, classicism, the naval store industry, and what that meant in terms of Georgia labor, and how the architecture is, of course, really important, right? You've got really prominent architects that are involved in this whole slew of grandiose projects going down the Atlantic coast, right into Florida. You've got the movie industry. You've got, all of these kinds of things.
This was all very validating to my growing obsession. Immediately after our email exchange, Dr. Abbey got in touch with Luciana to arrange an in-person visit with the statues and a sit-down interview with me. That revealed some things about the Greenwich statuary, Gilded Age wealth, and classical sculpture itself that kind of blew my mind. I think it might blow yours too. More of my conversation with Dr. Mark Abbey in the next episode of Savannah Sideways, the strange story of Savannah's ancient Roman statuary. The Savannah Sideways podcast is brought to you by The 5 Spot. Ancient artifacts may be fragile, but the 5 Spot's new menu is rock solid. Classics like the signature meatloaf and chicken fried chicken are still part of the permanent collection, while new masterpieces like Todd's famous chili and loaded mac and cheese with Mojo pulled pork and collard greens have joined the rotating exhibit. These curators of comfort food present a lineup of juicy burgers and giant salads for lunch and dinner 7 days a week, plus their famous brunch every Saturday and Sunday that's overflowing with bloodies and mimosas. With locations in Sandfly, Habersham Village, and Richmond Hill, the 5 Spot has something delicious for everyone at your table. And by Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum. Housed in the historic Scarborough House, the Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum pays homage to America's great maritime past while expanding its lens towards some of the city's most exciting artistic voices. Wander through luxurious galleries of ship models and modern installations, amble amongst exquisite gardens, or attend, or host, an event at the finest open-air venue in town. Book it all at shipsofthesea.org. Special thanks to our friends under the Lincoln Oaks. If you're too dumb for Starland and too ugly for downtown, there is a seat at the table and a spot at the bar for you at 6B, Lone Wolf Lounge, Over Yonder, and Mood Rights. This little slice of shade in Midtown is where the most fun goes down. And by Shot by Somi, award-winning portrait and brand photography for every occasion. A photo isn't just an image, it's a story whispered through light and time. Book your session at shotbysomi.com. The Savannah Sideways podcast is produced by D. Daniels Media, female-owned full podcast production services for businesses, nonprofits, and special projects. Storytelling with a purpose. Go to ddanielsmedia.com.